right delayed is a right denied. A right delayed is a right denied. Martin Luther King. Today is International Human Rights Day. When we talk about rights delayed, we mean there are people without their rights around the world. So a right delayed, a right denied is the theme. We have some adults today who want to speak on some of the rights that have been delayed and the impact it has when they're denied. Dania?
I'm going to read this because it's easier. I'm the art teacher. My name is Liz Carrasco. As many of you know, I'm from Chile. I wasn't born here. I was born in Chile, and I moved here when I was 25. That was like 200 years ago. So, here we go. I was born in Chile at the beginning of a dictatorship. The older I got, the more I understood what that meant and how it affected our lives. My family was against the dictator, and we discussed the turmoil in the country in our house, quiet. My parents told me, don't talk about this outside the house. People were being tortured and disappeared for speaking their mind against the dictatorship. Finally, when I was 14, Chile had elections. We won. The people who wanted a democratic country. I remember that day vividly. People were pouring out on the streets, laughing, dancing, cars honking their horns, strangers hugging each other. Finally, all Chileans could speak their minds without being pursued. Finally, I could speak to my friends and classmates how I felt about the dictator and my new country. On December 19th, this year, a couple more weeks, Chile will have the second round of elections to decide our next president, who our next president would be. I believe it's our right as human beings to be active part on the decisions of who is going to govern us and who is going to take care of us, and for us to have our own voice. Thank you.
The right delayed is a right denied. Beth Spencer.
While you guys are probably expecting me to talk about my international experience, I'm actually going to talk about a right delayed here in the U.S. Article 17 of the International Human Rights Convention says that everyone has the right to own property alone and in association with others. That has not always been true in the U.S. These days, it's really hard to imagine a need for this kind of article, at least in terms of American society. But it wasn't that long ago that even women didn't have the right to do that. In 1955, my grandmother became a widow, and she had 3 very young children, all under 5, to support. However, she was not allowed to get a credit card in her own name without having a male family member, since she had no husband, without having a male family member to co-sign that credit card with her. She couldn't get a loan. She couldn't get her mortgage without a man to sign with her. It was not until 1974, when many of your parents were already alive, that she could do that on her own, thanks to a federal law that was passed. And that's kind of mind-boggling to think about, like just in the last, 50 years, this has been something that women can do independently. It's not just a problem in the U.S., obviously. Property rights apply to much more than just credit card access and house access itself, but even land access. Right now, today, there are still 75 countries in the world where there are not laws protecting a woman's right to own property independent of men. 75 countries where inheritance automatically goes to a male family member unless there's some special legal parameter set forth before somebody passes on. But also, there's been time in the last 50 years and even today where we've seen lack of access to property end up impacting an entire population's safety and security and economic opportunity. For example, preceding and during apartheid in South Africa, which you guys all know Trevor Noah, he was born during that. 75% of South Africa's population was black. However, they were legally forbidden as a whole population from owning more than about 10% of the land in the country. And that still has huge economic implications for black people in South Africa. They still have not recovered land that was taken from them as part of apartheid. History has shown us that authoritarian regimes use property confiscation during genocide to decrease power of whoever it is that they are trying to limit or eliminate. We've seen that in the Holocaust. We've seen that in the Cambodian genocide in the 1970s. And so as a result, I think it's really important to recognize that land and property rights, whether it's for an individual who's needing to buy their own house or for an entire population, are critical for access to food, housing, development, and other economic opportunities.
Right delayed is a right denied. Liz Tyng.
So I really struggled to think about just one human right that I felt warranted this minute to share with you all. There were many that I contemplated. But I had a recent experience that led me back to this concept of talking to you about refugees. And so let me share a little bit with you about the status of the world as it relates to refugees, and then I'll tell you about my recent encounter. In 1950, the High Commissioner for Refugees was created to help millions of Europeans who had fled or lost their homes in the aftermath of World War II. Its original charter was only 3 years. It was supposed to just be this aid organization that helped these displaced people resettle, and then it was to disband. Yet 70 years later, its work continues to be even more relevant. Today, over 80 million people around the world have been forced to flee their homes, resulting from persecution, conflict, violence, human rights violations, or events disturbing public order. Among them are roughly 26 million refugees, around half of whom are under the age of 18. There are also millions of stateless people who've been denied a nationality and lack of access to basic rights such as education, healthcare, employment, and just the simple freedom of movement. So at this time, 1 in 95 people on Earth has fled their home and is currently seeking a home, a place to call home. Nearly 70% of all of those displaced people hail from 5 countries: Venezuela, Afghanistan, Myanmar, South Sudan, and Syria. Today on Human Rights Day, International Human Rights Day, I asked our community, ponder what it must feel like to flee your home, to leave with only the belongings on your back, and to seek refuge in a place that you can't speak the language, and you don't even know where you're going to end up. Think about having to start over in a strange land, an unfamiliar place, with unfamiliar customs and norms. Oftentimes, even more so, with all of your educational records destroyed. Having no record of your worth or capabilities to the world. Having that dignity stripped away from you. And having to seek employment well below your capability. Also knowing that you may never get to return, and you may never learn or know what's happened to your friends and family. So the reason why I chose to share this with you today is that in September, I went to a conference in Seattle. And as those of you who know me you know that I can pretty much strike up a conversation with anybody, right? And my husband often says this is both a lovely thing and a curse, because I come home and I share these stories with him, and then he has to feel sort of the burden of that new knowledge that he has about a person. But in Seattle, I was in the back of an Uber car and struck up the conversation with my Uber driver on the way to the airport. And he was one such person. And he shared his story with me, that he fled Eastern Europe after repeatedly trying to support the efforts of building a democracy in his country. He was maimed, he was harmed in that conflict, and he was offered a place in the Seattle area with $100 in his pocket. And it was the kindness of a woman in the community that took him and his family in to their home and helped him and helped them start their new life. In his previous world, he was an engineer. He earned a great living for his family and came to the United States without being able to speak English and with $100 in his pocket. And if it wasn't for the kindness of this person to help him and his family get resettled, who knows what would have happened to them. Yet, the thing that struck me most about this gentleman in our 20-minute car ride was just how grateful and how the amount of resiliency and optimism that he possessed. And so, while it might seem like a very daunting thing to think about 1 in 95 people in the world being displaced, I would like to challenge all of us to think about our impact on a human level, one-on-one, and the way in which we interact with people and learn about their stories. And maybe there's a way in which we can, and when we encounter people who are different than us, try to seek to first to understand and then to seek to help. So thank you.
We'll wrap this up with some information. A right delayed is a right denied. Food. Around the world, this planet produces enough food to feed everyone. Around the world. Yet 811 million people go hungry every year. The UN World Food Program estimates this number being 957 million people across 93 countries, including our own, do not have enough food to eat. A right delayed is a right denied. Water. 784 million people live without the basic access to clean water. Roughly 1 in 10 people on the planet. A right delayed is a right denied. Shelter. 2% of the world is homeless. 2% doesn't seem like a lot. We're talking about 154 million people. Education, a right delayed. It's a right denied. A right that all of you have. Education, global literacy rate, for people age 15 and above, is only 86%. And there's disparity even there. If you identify as a male, it's 90%. If you identify as female, it's only 80%. Speech, religion, identity, love, a right delayed is a right denied. And the reason we're talking to you about this on this day is because it's International Human Rights Day. We share some of our stories, not to make you feel powerless, but in hopes you feel powerful. Because yes, in our lifetimes, there's things in the world that haven't improved. The statistics I gave you feel like, wow, that's crazy. But we've gotten better. Over time, we've gotten better. The rates have decreased. But there's still people out there being denied. So the hope is, and the challenge is, all of you are going to go out in the world to be change makers, to be leaders, to have the ability to help others. Our hope and our challenge to all of you is, think about that, and how you can take a right denied and help that right be realized. Appreciate you. Thank you.